Unpopular opinion. Japanese animation is the best form of graphic art in this era. Also, One Piece had a better story than Naruto. But seriously, if you were forced to only watch one type of media for the rest of your life between live actions, 3D, and anime, what would it be? You guessed it, I'm a big fan of animation, and I've always loved drawing anime characters, mostly Dragon Ball and Naruto. As I grew up, I slowly got bored from drawing on paper, and one day I got myself a drawing tablet just to feel something. And I felt many things. Digital art is OP. I can't imagine a life without Control Z. Drawing was fun again, but not enough. So I started animation. Man, 3D animation is hard, but it's rewarding. Sometimes. I made many mistakes when I started learning in 2021. Avoiding those mistakes would have made learning easier and more enjoyable for me, but I was too bored. I still am, and I wanted to do the flashy cool things right from the beginning. Almost burnt myself out for no reason. But learned valuable lessons I'm gonna share with you. This is an animation tutorial I wish the beginner me had watched when I started animation. We're gonna cover step by step all the aspects you need to get started the right way. Then we're going to do more advanced exercises involving characters. Yeah, it's probably too hard for beginners, but I don't learn from my mistakes. Let's go. It's tempting to pick up a pen and start drawing stuff around thinking you'll learn on the go. You won't. If you've never done anything related to animation before, it's crucial that you know some of the most important rules about animation. Knowing these makes you instantly better than all the Twitter Sakuga fans. Mastering them gives you a hope for a better future in animation. So if you don't want to spend 3 months animating a wonky bouncy ball, sit down and let's talk about animation principles. There are in total 12 animation principles, but we are going to focus on those you can't live without, and they are easing, anticipation, overshoot, and arcs. As we progress in the video, we're going to introduce other animation principles and their applications, so stick around. These 4 principles are the basis for any good looking animation, and I'll show you why. The first principle we're going to showcase here is the easings. Look at this guy jumping on this trampoline. This is what the animation looks like without easing. There is no visual clue about his speed or his weight. The movement is constant, boring, and unrealistic. And here's how it looks like with easing. We can now guess how heavy he is, and we can see better his acceleration between the two extremes of his movement. This is what we call easing. At the beginning it's called ease in, and at the end it's called ease out. It can also be referred as slow in and slow out. To do this, you just need to add in between frames at the two extremes. Depending on the action you're animating, you can only add it at the end or at the beginning. Now if the guy starts jumping straight from this pose, it looks off. No one jumps like this. Stop. He needs the second animation principle called anticipation. He needs to build energy before he can do the jump. This is what the anticipation is for. It's literally in the name. The subject anticipates the movement. This helps convey the intention of the character to the audience and makes the movement look more natural. Speaking about nature, all living creatures' movements define arcs, especially all the couples and their dogs walking outside. Now seriously, only mechanical objects move without arcs. You can observe it with your own movements, your arms, your head, and all your body follow arcs when it moves. Check this fish out. Without arcs he would drown. So if you want your animation to look natural, you need to add arcs to your movements. See, now he's safe. The fourth animation principle is the overshoot. Due to physics laws, it's complicated for an object to abruptly stop its movement without getting carried by its momentum. Look at this guy for example. If he jumps off the trampoline and then it's perfectly straight, it doesn't look right, because it's wrong. But when you add some overshoot to it, now it looks better. To create an overshoot, you can just add one or more extreme poses before settling the character. The faster the movement is, the bigger the momentum will be. These are the rules. You don't make them, they make you. Now you can still mess up an animation even if you respect all the previous principles we discussed if you don't know about timing and spacing. These two are what's going to make your animation look either choppy or smooth, fast or slow, so pay attention. Here's what you need to know about timing and spacing. They're both related but not quite the same. Simply put, timing is the distance between keyframes and spacing is the distance between drawings. Depending on the action you're animating, you'll want to make sure those are respected. For example, if you want to communicate the speed of a character, you can have your keyframes be close to each other and put more space between poses. And if you want to make the animation slower, you can draw poses close to each other and put the keyframes further apart. Finding the right spacing and timing is crucial for making smooth animations. Beginners tend to ignore that, thinking more frames makes the animation smooth, but that's not true. And I'll show you later in the video how with just a few frames you can have a smooth animation. You've probably noticed I've been only using simple shapes in all the examples I've shown you. The reason is I want to flex about my form drawing, but I also want you to understand the importance of learning how to animate these shapes properly, before moving to complex shapes. Fortunately, animation is a very humbling discipline. If you ignore the basics, it's going to be very rude to you. The problem stubborn beginners face after skipping form drawing is non-consistent drawing in their animations, difficulty in animating objects from different angles, and obviously bad perspective and solid drawing, and so on and so forth. How was a stubborn beginner runs? I'm sure I would have lost much less time if I put more effort into animating primitive shapes. It can look boring at first, but it's essential to properly animate complex shapes like characters later. Because what are characters but many primitive shapes attached together? So if you don't want your animation to look like a reverse evolution process, don't skip form drawing. Before moving to the walk cycle tutorial, let's talk about something beginners tend to neglect. The essence of animation is tricking the viewers into believing that what they're seeing makes sense. One way to do that is to showcase believable physics, and for that you need to properly communicate the weight of the character and objects. You can add weight to your animation by showing how your subject reacts to its environment. A card box falling on the ground has a different reaction than a brick or a balloon filled with water. Squash and stretch is the name of the principle of animation involved here. Soft bodies are more influenced by speed and impact. When falling, the bottle balloon starts to stretch when reaching full speed, and squashes at the contact with the ground. Rigid bodies like the brick don't really care about that. Their shape remains unchanged when subjected to speed, but they can break or transfer the energy to what comes in contact with them. Let's put what we've learned to practice. If you've skipped the beginning, the answers to your future questions are in the past. All cycles can be as hard or as easy as you want it to be. We want it to be easy, so let's do something basic any beginner can replicate. First, let's agree on a simple character. Always choose simple character designs when practicing animation. You don't want to have to draw too many details 100 times. We won't have to. This walk cycle is only going to last for 8 frames in total. This is our reference image. It's a breakdown of all the main poses involved in the walk cycle. Replicating these exactly in the order they're drawn here will give you a walk cycle, and that's what we're going to do. I'm using Blender by the way, but the software you'll use doesn't really matter. First I'll draw 2 lines that will serve as a guide for the position of the feet and the head, so we can have the right size on all drawings. Now in the second layer I'll start by drawing the first pose, which is called the contact pose, looking at the reference image to make sure we do this right. It doesn't have to be the exact same position, so you're free to move the arms further if you want, or even keep them still. Then about 4 frames later I'll create a new keyframe and draw the down pose, which is when the head is at its lowest height during the walk cycle. I chose to place this keyframe at this distance because I know by experience it will give me the right timing I'm looking for. But if you figured out the timing of your animation for the first time, you can try to get a video reference of the action you want to animate, and then use the same timing, or just break down the animation into key poses with a constant timing, and move keyframes closer or further apart and see what looks better. It's worth mentioning that I'm animating with a frame rate of 24 frames per second. Okay, now let's do the same for the third pose called the passing, which is the second most important pose of the walk cycle, because you can have a walking motion just with 2 contact poses and a passing pose. It won't look realistic though. This time I duplicated the previous keyframe, so I won't have to redraw everything from scratch. This helps also keep the drawings consistent. So here the character's head is a bit taller than the contact pose, since he's taking support on his contact leg to bring the opposite leg forward. And you can see both arms are close to a neutral position around the body, as they're following the passing motion in the opposite direction. Now the next pose is called the up pose. And as you can see on the reference images, when the head is the highest, since the character is pushing on his standing foot while the opposite leg is preparing for the next contact pose. And as for the previous pose, the arms are also moving in the opposite direction, getting ready for the next contact pose. So now we have drawn all the poses we need for the walk cycle, which are in reality just 4, because you can clearly see that the contact poses are the same here. So we just need to flip the one we have already drawn at the beginning to continue the walk. And obviously that's also what we're going to do for the other poses until the walk cycle is complete. Because for a walk cycle to be complete, the beginning needs to meet the end, so we can loop this forever. To flip the poses, we can just copy the original pose and modify the legs and arms, and we're keeping the same timing. In Blender I can just give the blue color to the previously orange leg, so I don't have to redraw it. But on some frames like the passing pose where the legs are overlapping, I'll have to redraw it. Let's do that for all the poses until we reach the final pose, which will be the up pose, because we don't need to redraw the contact pose again, since this is a cycle. And by stopping it here, the end is the beginning. Hope that makes sense to you. And now when we play our animation, you can see we have a good looking walk cycle with just 8 drawings. This next part is optional, you can skip it. This is just to show you can add some colors if you want. I'll just create a new layer and use the pen bucket tool to fill in colors. And in case you're wondering, the answer is yes, you need to create a new keyframe for each pose you're coloring. And for the poses that were duplicated previously, you can also duplicate the colors. And after that, I'll show you how we can add a background and create a simple parallax effect. Before creating the parallax effect, we need to make the animation last a little longer than 8 frames, and for that I'm going to do something Blender specific here, which is using the dub sheet to make this animation longer. But for those of you who are using other software, if you don't have a similar tool, you can just copy all the keyframes of your animation throughout the timeline to make it last as long as you want. Just make sure the last keyframe of every cycle is the up pose, and you won't make mistakes. Luckily in Blender we don't have to do that, we can just use the non-linear animation tools to cycle it without much effort. And all you have to do is click on the dub sheet and select the action editor. Then go to the modifiers tab and add a time offset modifier. Then set the mode to fixed frames and place the playhead at the beginning of the timeline. And create a keyframe by clicking on the dot here. Then do the same for the last frame of the animation, update the number of the frame, and create another keyframe. This is so we can see this animation on the action editor, which currently doesn't integrate grease pencil actions. You can see how action has been created. You can save it by clicking on the shield icon here. And after that, just click on brush down to place it on the non-linear animation editor. Finally, change the window to non-linear animation, and here we can select our animation strip and go to action clip and increase the number of repeats. I'll make it last for around 250 frames, which is about 10 seconds. That's it, our walk cycle can now play for 250 frames. Okay, so now we can finally add a background, but we're not going to draw it. We're going to download an image from Google. You can also just take a screenshot of it if you want to. The quality doesn't really matter. After that, in Blender, we're going to add it as a plane and place it behind our animation as the background. I'm going to scale it up a little and move it behind the character, and I'll also move the character down. Finally, to get the parallax effect, we can simply go at the beginning of our animation, move the background plane at the front, and create a keyframe. You can change the window back to the timeline if you can't see the keyframe. Then go at the last frame of the animation and move the image horizontally, then create another keyframe. Select both keyframes by pressing A on the timeline and press T to change the interpolation, and choose linear. That's it, we can now play our animation and enjoy the nice parallax we've created effortlessly. It'd be too bad not to show you one last cool trick though since we got this far. Usually beginners don't like nodes, but I promise this is going to be easy, just one node. This is what you could be missing, a beautiful painterly look, just with one node.
Nice.
All you have to do is go to the Compositing tab and click Enable Nodes. Here you have the render layers and the composite nodes by default. To visualize the result of the compositing, we need to add a viewer node by pressing Ctrl plus Shift and right click on the node, or just press Shift plus A and add a viewer node and plug it to the node you want to visualize. Then press F12 to render the image so we can see it in the background. You can press V to zoom out or Alt plus V to zoom in. After that, search for a Kohara node and place it in between these two nodes and plug it to the viewer node as well so we can see its effect. And that's it. That's it, we're done. If you want to see it in real time, you can do so by enabling the compositor in the material preview mode or in the render preview mode. Currently, it's not really accurate, so we need to render to see the actual results. I'm not gonna lie, it looks mid like this. So if you want to get the same result like that, you can add this filter node and set it to diamond sharpen to make the image crisper. Before rendering, you need to enable Z-passes in the View Layer tab so the engine can render grease pencil objects without issues. And then we can go to the Output tab and set the resolution we want and the frame rate, even though I recommend keeping it at 24 FPS so it doesn't look sped up. And then you have the frame range, which is the length of our animation on the timeline, so you don't need to change that unless you want to render only a specific part. You can choose the output folder where your video will be rendered here. And finally, you can choose the file format you want. By default, it's set to image sequence. If you want a movie file, you can choose any other format here. I usually go with MP4, so I'll set it to FFmpeg, and finally, for the container, I'll set it to MPEG-4. Now all you have to do is click render animation or press Ctrl plus F12, and we're done. If you made it here, congratulations, you now have a beautiful walk cycle animation with a parallax effect you can flex about. You can be proud of yourself. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of me. But let's be honest, this is a little too advanced for beginners, so don't feel bad if you failed somewhere in the process. I know it was too advanced, but I wanted to show you why you should practice small animation exercise before engaging with long projects that are going to take many weeks. This one was relatively easy because it's a cycle, but sometimes you really have to draw 100 different drawings for just 6 seconds of animation. That can be heavy for somebody who is just getting started. So don't make the same mistakes my beginner self made, taking on 3 months long fan animation projects because it was cooler and flashier. The result was bad and he did not improve that much. Almost burned himself out. Small and short projects help you build confidence and progress much faster. So my advice is that in your first months as a beginner, don't get into projects that will last longer than 1 or 2 weeks. You need to focus on small animation exercises to master the fundamentals. Don't get influenced by what you see on social media. It's inspiring, but take your time, don't rush the process. For most of these talented animators, it took them years to reach that level. This is the advice I would give to my beginner self, even though I know he wouldn't listen. Some people can only learn by failing, and that's fine, as long as you fail fast and a lot. But I'm sure he'd be proud to know that his mistakes could help at least one person get better at animation. If you have trouble finding small animation ideas, you can try the 51 animation exercises of the Animator Island website. They're really good to practice the animation principles we discussed about and even more. I tried those when I started animation and I failed most of them, so I'm preparing revenge on them very soon. And if you want to learn more about animation in Blender, you can check out this video here where I cover the basic tools you need to get started with Grease Pencil. This has been a long video. Thanks if you watched all the way through, and subscribe if you like the content, and see you next time.